I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast, where we dive into the science of health and wellbeing. Hello, brother Simon. How you doing in sunny Spain?
Hello. Very well, thank you. And it is sunny. The sunny weather has returned. Still, it's a little bit cool still, but the sunny weather is definitely here. Yesterday, I got out for an hour's walk in the sun in the park just near where I live, which was just beautiful. Just beautiful. It was really lovely being outside. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, we're coming into winter, but it's still sunshine at the moment, so we're trying to make the most of it. So
Yeah. I'm one of those people who gets, and there is controversy about, not controversy, but there is ongoing sort of discourse and dialogue about the extent to which this is a separate and distinct thing. But I'm one of those people who's affected seasonally with respect to mood. So my mood generally bounces along pretty highly. But when the weather cools off and the days shorten and the sky tends to darken, not nighttime darken, but grey cloudy darken, I really feel my mood shifting, and the world feels smaller. I would say, while I don't feel pessimistic, I do feel slightly less optimistic than I usually do. I want to do less. Yeah, it's a really and I've tried for years to sort of get past it, and I can manage it to some extent, but
definitely
I don't know. It just happens with the season. So yeah.
I think it'd be hard. It's hard not to be affected by the weather, I think, in some regard. But anyway, I'm making the most of the sunshine whilst it's here.
Absolutely.
But I have a question for you. And the question is, are you wealthy, Simon?
Absolutely.
And by the way, this isn't an invitation to declare your bank account or anything like that. But first, the big question: do you consider yourself a wealthy person?
Yeah, don't start asking me for my birthday or the number of the house that I first lived in, or my pets, my first pet's name or something. I'm onto you, Morton.
All right.
Absolutely. I consider myself wealthy, and in many different ways. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, tell me more about that. What do you mean by that statement?
Well, for me, wealth. Well, if I use the metaphor of health, for example, so whenever I'm teaching or whenever I'm working directly with someone, in my mind, health. I always think of health as a resource. Health is not an outcome or an end in and of itself. Health is a resource that we use to be able to do and achieve the things that are important to us in life. So for me, the idea of wealth then is really that idea of resources. What resources do you have in your life? And if I think about it that way, then I would say that I'm very fortunate to be well resourced, in a number of different dimensions in my life.
So completely unprompted, you've probably just stolen the thunder for this discussion. And I like it. You know what? I really like actually even how you've articulated that whole idea of wealth is having an abundance of resources available to you. Anyway, I've just recently read a book, and that I'd love to talk about. It's Sahil Bloom, who's written this book called The 5 Ways to Wealth, and I think he came up with a whole lot of things I already knew, but probably he articulated them and pulled them together in a more succinct fashion that that I really liked, and it's funny, because I've talked with people many times, and when we say the word wealth, instantly our mind tends to go towards financial wealth.
Dollars. Yeah.
And I've said to people, even on the financial aspect, look, you know what? It's not like I'm, I still have a home loan. I drive a 15-year-old car. My house I built myself, and I do the repairs and maintenance typically on it. So it's not like, I'm flush with cash. I am very, very mindful of the fact, though, that I can have 3 meals on the table and I get to go on holidays makes me very, very privileged. Like, by the world standard, I would be in that, that top little part just by virtue of where I live and what I get to do. But I
don't want to assume too much here, but I think also maybe you've got 2 or perhaps even 3 or 4 people in your life who actually like you.
I'm hoping so. Yeah, that's right. And this once again, we're going to come to that point in just a moment as well. But but even despite in my current situation, and I think Sahil Bloom articulates a whole lot better. But I have found myself saying to people before, I actually am, in my mind, even financially, one of the most wealthy people I know. Right, and I know some very, very wealthy people in terms of their balance. And my balance is nothing like theirs. But, but the truth be told, there's nothing I actually want. And I remember I used to tell my kids, I'd say, there's 2 ways to be wealthy. It's earn more or want less. And when you if you're not wanting more, then you have everything you need. That's a very, very unique position to be in, and financial wealth, and there's a whole lot of questions that can be asked about, what is enough. But to cut to the chase, he actually argues that there is these 5 types of wealth, and I'd love to talk about them, and I'd love to throw them at you a little bit. And it's in some ways there's nice alignment. He's using the wealth sort of paradigm, but there's nice alignment between the domains of wellness, or the dimensions of wellness, if you like.
Yeah. Okay.
But he starts. He says so. There are 5 types of wealth, and let's look at them in order. And we're going to leave the financial part to the end, because he actually does this in the book. And I think this is actually quite wise, the approach here, because he's really trying to flip the lid and shift our thinking around how we consider what true wealth is. But anyway, he leads with time wealth, and he talks about the whole idea of time wealth. What does time wealth look like? And if to use that phrasing, time wealth, where does your mind go with that? And would you say that you have good time wealth?
Yeah, interesting. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is that time wealth is really the ultimate in democratizing wealth. If we think about time wealth, then every single living person on the planet has the opportunity to be equally wealthy with all the others, because we all get 24 hours in a day, we all get 168 hours in a week, and so on and so on. What we choose to do with that time, of course, is an important question. But if we're talking about resources, the actual resource is there in equal amounts for all of us.
Let me ask. Yeah. Let me push you a bit on that one, because you said we all have, it's democratized. We all have the exact same amount available to us, and it's interesting when when he talks about, so Sahil talks about what time wealth looks like. He sort of argues that truth be told, probably not all of us do have the same time wealth, clearly, because it's a type of wealth. The reason being is that some of us actually have very high levels of pressure that regulate and control how we sort of almost forced to spend our time. Like, for example, we think in certain places where people, have certain job situations, or they might be in positions where their circumstances dictate that this is where you have to be and this is how your time has to be spent. There is, and so there's sort of changes. Like I remember, he talked, actually, he has this really cool story And I think there's a whole lot we could talk about time wealth. I think it actually really challenged my thinking. And what I came to the conclusion is that I actually feel very rich with regards to my time wealth. And the reason for it is that I actually have a huge amount of autonomy with how I spend my time. So and what I actually came to realize in reflecting on what he writes about, but, you know, when I wake up in the morning, there's typically things that I, you know, have to get done. A lot of them of my own choosing. So I actually get to decide what I pour my energies into, what writing project I might want to do today, who I might want to meet with. There are times where I'm locked in and I have to do a particular thing. But even for me, I'd probably choose to do those things. It's not that often that I'm doing something that I don't enjoy doing. And this is, and don't tell any of my bosses here, although I'm sort of half my own boss, but I, you know, if I wanted to, I could orchestrate my day so I could probably go to the beach and go for a quick surf most days. Like, that is an incredibly privileged position. And
absolutely.
And so that whole idea of time wealth.
So as you've been talking, my thinking about this is nuancing a little bit, and while, you know, fundamentally, what I said is true. There's 168 hours in the week for everybody. Yes. Doesn't matter who you are, or where you are. You get the same number of hours. It's certainly important for us to think about this systemically, and there's two dimensions to that immediately come to mind for me. The first is, what for a given individual, you know, what else is going on in their life, you know, and I'm thinking about things perhaps that go on that we don't necessarily even feel like we have a sense of control over. So, for example, if you're the parent of a sick child who needs, you know, a number of medical appointments and so on, you know, that's I guess that's to some extent an impost on your time. By the same token, you know, over the years that I've been in clinical practice, I've spoken with lots of parents who've been in this very situation. I'm yet to speak with a parent who begrudges that investment of time for that purpose. You know, they do it gladly and willingly. So we now we start to see two things. First of all, there's this kind of intersection between different types of wealth, and I know we're going to talk about financial wealth at the end, but if you were to adjust your views of what sort of wealth you might need financially, then that might make more wealth available for you in other areas of your life. And I suspect this is not a zero-sum game either. I don't think it's, you know, I don't think there's just a set amount of wealth and you just have to choose how you distribute it in your life. But there's an intersection of the wealth that we have with the values that we have as well. What matters to us, what we think is important in our lives.
I agree with that. And I think that whole idea that you've just introduced, that there is a trade-off, and we can almost trade off one type of wealth for another. And interestingly, financial wealth is often the one that features, and a big sacrifice that we make often to achieve that is time wealth.
Time wealth,
and interesting, you know, like, you know, you get to you know, our age, and you do start to go, hey, you know what? How much time do I have? You know, it's probably it's he actually talks about, and I've seen it illustrations where, you know, draw a calendar with all the days of your life in it, and then just cross out, you know, like if you were to live to, you know, even put a 10% buffer on there, right, just for good effect, so that you're going to go 10% longer than the average person, but then tick off how many you've already gone through, and you go, whoo, like at our end, it's actually, you know, we're past the halfway line. And you know, he actually has this great story where he said he was chatting with someone, and he said to them, I'm heading over to see my family. They live on the other side of the United States. And his friend said, "Oh, how old are they?" And they're about 65. His parents. And he said, "Oh, how often do you go over?" And he said, "Oh, about once a year we get to see him." He said, "Oh, so you'll probably get to see him about 15 more times." And he said that was a really and once again it points to what matters here. What are your values? How do you want to invest that time?
So interestingly, I've been having this discussion with my oldest son just recently. He's 30, and he has a son of his own who's now 7 months old, and he's spent his entire career after he's an engineer. Spent his entire career after university working in an industrial kind of setting, a very busy, high pressured, heavy industrial setting in Australia, and he's done very well, and he's done very well professionally, and he acknowledges that he gets compensated for his time there very well, and at the same time, he's now articulating recollections of his childhood and the amount of time that he and I were together, and the benefit that he can now say that he derived from that. And also now this kind of internal tension that he's starting to experience about, so I want to start shifting some things in my world because I'm not happy, or I'm not going to be happy if I keep on that same path I've been on. I want to do with my child what I experienced in my own life. Yeah,
and that's a beautiful thing, So I think this is a good place to start. How
absolutely.
And obviously sometimes we're constrained with how we have to use our time. Maybe we're supporting a family. There's some people that might be working 2 jobs or whatever. So I'm not discounting the challenges.
Maybe someone's cracking the whip over you to finish writing a PhD.
Maybe they are. Who would do such a thing?
I know.
But nonetheless, it has been a good point of reflection for me, and I think that that it is for all of us to think, hey, what? How do I want to? If I do have some autonomy, how do I want to spend my time? And what really matters, and what how can I spend my time in a way that aligns with my values? So that's number one, time wealth. Then he talks about social wealth. And he talks about the whole idea of not just the breadth of your social connectedness, but the depth of your social connectedness. And I like that. In fact, that really quite resonated with me because I feel like it feels like from an impact perspective, I've always sort of tried to function this way. Like I run the Lift Project, and the Lift Project is really about large scale impact. I'm trying to, get broad, have, reach many people. But then what I also love is that I teach at the university. We run a dedicated wellbeing program here, and it's undergraduate students. And this weekend we're taking 90 of them away camping, and we do hiking with them, and we do these other experiences. And you get to connect with people on a really small scale, like we break them up into small groups. But I love that whole idea of wide, but deep and wide. That social aspect. If I had to rate, I feel very, very rich from a social perspective. Because I feel like I know a lot of people. And the deep, and that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He had this really interesting term I'd love your thoughts on. He talked about within your social wealth also comes through what he called earned status. So this is not some status that you've had bestowed upon you, but this is something the genuine affection of others that you've earned because of the investment you've made, whatever that might be.
Okay. Yeah.
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
Yeah, look, I quite like that. I quite like that concept, and I can say that I get to experience that. I think if I'm understanding his concept correctly, I think I get to experience that. One of the here's some evidence that we should all listen to our mothers more. When I was a kid in high school, my mother, who's now passed away, she passed away several years ago. But when I was a kid in high school, my mother had this vision that I would finish school, go and study something at university, probably French language, which is exactly what I did, and then go and complete a PhD and become an academic, and in some ways, when I look back now, that reflected, I think, some desires for her life that, for various circumstances, she was not able to enact. So she wanted that I had the opportunity to do something that she did. So I went and studied French language at university, but I didn't do any of the rest of the stuff, and became a psychologist and a clinician and so on. Spent many years working as a clinician before I started, drifting towards teaching and training and lecturing, and now these days I'm kind of a clinician turned academic. I do much less clinical work, much more teaching and academic work. But here's the kicker. I love being an academic. I loved teaching way more than I ever loved being a clinician. I mean, being a clinician was fun, and I really enjoyed the interactions I had with clients and patients. But I love teaching with a capital L, and a capital V. I absolutely adore teaching, and I'm very conscious of really investing my time and energy in relationships with students, so that I can resource them to be, in a sense, the very best clinicians and practitioners that they can be in their domains. And I get a lot of emails and messages from students expressing appreciation for that, which makes me feel incredibly wealthy in that sense.
I like that. It's interesting that earned status. When I read that, I thought, earned status, what does he mean by that? And I think, as you get older, obviously legacy becomes an important piece. There's I think there's two paths you can go with this, and one is to sort of be up in, climb to some echelon so that you're on a pedestal and your legacy is, or you're seen as like, up here. But there's another type of legacy, and that is exactly what you're describing. It's about, you're reaching down, trying to help people up to the level on the cliff that you've been able to get to. And what I've realised more and more, like, to be honest, I never thought, I never had any aspiration to become a full professor at a university. It's been a bit of a journey. And what's sort of cool about getting to, that sort of status, if you like, is that you realise there's actually nothing special about that. Like, it's not like, it's sort of nice. It's nice being able to arrive at a place to realise that doesn't change anything. Like, it doesn't change the person you are. It doesn't change. No. And what I think is, I've really embraced that whole idea of, people won't remember, who you were or what you taught them necessarily. They'll remember how you made them feel. And when I feel most socially wealthy is when it's, once again, like you, my students, undergraduate students, they call me Dazza, and they want to talk about life. Or they want to, a tip or a trick about, hey, what would you do? And to be able to mentor people and share life with them, I think that's
it's a real privilege, isn't it? Yeah.
It is a real privilege, So I like that. So
I love it.
We need to keep moving. I realise this is a good topic. So time wealth, social wealth, and then he talks about mental wealth, and obviously mental wealth. He uses that term, which I think is one of your favourite words, that whole idea of curiosity, and having I suppose, the time and the ability to actually be curious and grow and learn new stuff, to have purpose and meaning and pursue those sorts of things. And certainly, I agree. I think that having those sorts of resources, that mental wealth, that's a beautiful thing. I think that's one of the most joyous aspects of what it means to be wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
How would you rate that? Like, how important would you say that's to you?
So I don't know whether we're going to come to this one subsequently, but of course, being a psychologist, my mind immediately goes to something that rhymes with mental wealth, which is mental health. So I don't know whether in his taxonomy he considers mental health per se a part of that, and also includes all those other things, like our capacity to be curious, to use our cognitive resources, to develop our cognitive resources, and so on.
Yes.
In which case, look, I agree, and I certainly experienced that myself. And the other thing that's in my mind is that there's a really nice intersection of this material with common factors theory, which we've talked about before on this podcast. The origin of common factors theory was in the middle of the 20th century, after we already had a number of different approaches to counselling and behaviour change and help and so on. So, most people are familiar with Sigmund Freud at the very end of the 19th century, often considered the founder of psychoanalysis, Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst, Carl Jung, Skinner, the behaviourist, then Carl Rogers, the human-centred practitioner, who also started introducing cognition to the model as well as behaviourism. So by the middle of the 20th century, lots of questions about, we've got all these different ways of helping people. Which one's the best? So the common factors researchers started trying to answer that question. And what they found was all of those things work very well and about as well as each other, but they're not the most important thing. The most important factor in someone's capacity to experience a change or an improvement in their life is their own resources and their capacity to further build and develop those. And we can think of internal resources and external resources there. So internal resources are things like my beliefs, my attitudes, my values, my knowledge, and so on. External resources are things like my relationships, my connections, the community in which I live, the system or the structure in which I work, the amenity of my environment, and so on. So in that sense, the resources that we all have available to us are the strongest determinant of the outcomes that we experience when we endeavour to make a change. And so this whole idea that we're talking about sits really nicely with this for me, because it reminds us that all resources are wealth.
Yes, our wealth.
Yeah.
And certainly mental resources. And
mental
I like
resources as well. Yeah.
And I like how we pulled in the whole, doing purposeful things, doing meaningful things. That's a form of wealth. Yeah. And this is why I think, we have people, for example, who volunteer, or who give to good causes, and that upticks their wealth. That upticks their overall satisfaction with life. So time wealth, social wealth, mental wealth.
And I'll say here from a health perspective too, this is where we start seeing the intersections. So research done by Barbara Fredrickson and some colleagues many years ago also showed that those experiences of what you and I often talk about as eudaimonic well-being, volunteering and so on, they result in upregulation of markers for immunity and downregulation of markers for inflammation. So there's a credible social, biological, or biosocial, or biopsychosocial, if you like, pathway that explains how resources in this area of our life can end up bringing us resources in that area of our life.
Yeah, and I like how you keep using the word resources, because I think, like, and for Barbara's work on the broaden and build theory, the whole idea that when you're actually experiencing more mental wealth, you expand your repertoire of resources you have access to, including
exactly
social,
right.
including physical, which leads us to the next type of wealth, the fourth type of wealth that he speaks about, which is physical wealth. And this one, this is underrated. I think that there is definitely a tendency, and I see this, at our age, I see this all the time, and I hear my friends, lamenting this, that the fact that they invested in other forms of wealth, namely financial wealth, at the cost of physical health. And I feel incredibly rich in this space. I mean, I went and did a park run last week. We were away with some friends, which adds to social wealth. And we went up there, and wherever we go away we took our caravans and up to Nelson Bay, which is it's a beautiful park in the world. And there's a park run there. So all the guys now, as part of our, there's about 5 families, we all go and do the local park run. And there was 200 people there. I got second in this park run. I ran 18 minutes and 3 seconds for 5K. Anyway, I finished it. I'm chatting with the young fella who'd won it. And then I was standing there and I just thought...
the young fella, he wasn't 83 years old, was he?
No, he wasn't. If he did, he looked incredibly good for that. But anyway, then I just thought, how lucky am I? And, I find myself often with regards to health thinking, how lucky am I? But probably a better way to think is, how wealthy am I? Like in terms of my health. And we've got one member of our crew who actually moved to the area, and about 5 years ago, he never done sort of any formal type exercise before, but we invited him to park run with us because there's a bit of a community, that's doing it in amongst my network. He started, and his times just went dunk, 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 and now he's lost a lot of weight. And he actually said his comment was, because at the end of it, we all went for a swim down the beach together, and he said, "I'm just so thankful, for the social wealth, for the community I'm part of, but beyond that, for the physical wealth that I'm experiencing." Because he didn't use that term, but viewing it through this lens, I was going, you think about many people spend a lot of their life trying to gain their financial wealth at the cost of their physical health, and yet at the end of their life, they would give away pretty much all of their financial wealth to maintain
to have
their physical health. So obviously lifestyle medicine speaks to this. There's incredible.
Absolutely, and I'm thinking as we say this right now that in fact one of the ways to think about lifestyle medicine is that lifestyle medicine is a wealth creation scheme.
Beautiful.
When we practice lifestyle medicine, we quite literally create wealth for ourselves by attending to all of those dimensions of our lives in ways that build our resources over time.
I love that. And so anyway, to wrap this up and to come to obviously the last one, which is when we talk about wealth, the one that our minds typically go to, he talks about financial wealth. And
can I say this now seems really unimportant. Now that we've had this discussion up to this point, financial wealth just seems to be I don't know. It feels. I mean, I don't want to be dismissive, and I certainly don't want to I certainly don't want to pretend that you and I haven't benefited from elements of that. And at the same time, it feels much less important than the things that we've been talking about so far.
Doesn't it? It doesn't, for sure. And he talks a lot about the enough life. And I think there's a really good, and we've talked about this in another podcast, but I think, and I have great interest in this topic at the moment, exploring what is enough, because there will never be enough, in terms of our financial wealth. He reports on one particular study that was conducted in the United States with multimillionaires. And they were asked, how much would you need to be, to live a wealthy life, to be considered wealthy. Well, how much would you need? Regardless of whether they had 1 million, 5 million, 25 million, they were all pretty much saying 2 to 3 times the amount that I've got. And so there's an interesting insight in that, isn't it? So it's not like there's ever going to probably be enough in that sort of financial.
Yeah.
Unless you're very about asking what is enough.
I used to have this discussion with my boys when they were young, and they're now 30 and 27, as I said. But we used to talk about how much money do you actually need, and so we would literally do the mathematics. So we'd kind of calculate. So in order to live the life that you want, what do you want? A house, and you want a nice car, a car of your choosing. So we'd work out how much that would be. At that stage, as a family, we owned a small aeroplane. Because I have a pilot's license, and so aviation was a part of my boys' life growing up. So of course they wanted that, but we didn't just factor in a little plane like we had. We factored in a private jet. With a pilot to be able to take you wherever you want in the world, and the operating costs. And so we did this deliberately as a really kind of extreme sort of thinking experiment. Imagine you could have absolutely every single thing that you could possibly want. Another house in the south of France, and so on and so forth. And most of the time, we never managed to get past about $50 million. Now, $50 million is a lot of money, but in our conversation, $50 million represented a really extreme lifestyle. And if you put $50 million alongside the sorts of individual wealths financial wealths that we see, that it really pales. And in fact, once you start talking about someone being a billionaire, essentially it's meaningless.
Stupid.
What are you ever going to do with a billion? And most people have no concept of the size of $1 billion, by the way. So if you could. It's just the idea of doing something with $1 billion is just ridiculous. You couldn't possibly.
He makes this interesting comment, which, and I'm going to butcher it because I can't remember it verbatim, but it was along the lines of, financial wealth won't produce true wealth, but it might enable it if it's spent in the right way. So, if, for example, you had financial wealth that allowed you to have autonomy with your time and spend it on important stuff, to connect with people, to care for your physical health and well-being, and to do meaningful things that grow you and engage you. It's a great pathway. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Wealth. What is wealth, and what's most important? And perhaps to conclude it, let me ask you this: out of those, time wealth, social wealth, mental health wealth, physical wealth, and financial wealth, I was going to ask you which is the most important to you, but maybe a better way to ask this would be, what would be, do you think, the least important to you?
Oh, wow. I can't say. I can't, because in my mind, in my mind, they, so I'm the original do everything all the time now person. So I do that. Those questions about which one is more important to you, I genuinely find very difficult to answer, because they all feel important, and I can't. As soon as I say in my mind, this one matters less than that one, internally I start to connect with a sense of sort of loss and sadness about what that would mean. So. I'm just going to say I completely reject your question.
Do it. Reject it. What I will say from my perspective is, I think that historically, when people use the word wealth, I would instantly think financial wealth. And what I would say is, I think that certainly it's not the most important when I look at that 5 types.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think
it has
even
its
when
place.
and you sort of even had this sentiment when we started to talk about that fifth type. You went, it sort of paled a bit compared to what we traditionally think when we think the words wealth. So I think, you know what, I'd love just to take away from this to wrap is, what does wealth look like for you? And what's most important, and what if you could, create a truly wealthy life, what would be the ingredients in there? What would it look like? And realizing there is going to be you're going to have to compromise one to maybe, flourish the others. So what does it look like? Be intentional and choose a wealthy life that works for you.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.